So welcome everyone to the webinar today, which we've organised on patient involvement in the ERN evaluation process. I think the evaluation of the ERNs coming at the end of their first 5-year cycle is a real important point for us to take stock as a patient community and contribute to the evaluation process to make sure that ERNs go from good to great. I've organised the webinar today with a short introduction to go through some of the support tools which we've developed to support you and to walk through two sections. One is answering the questions, why are we doing the evaluation? What will it be about? Who will be involved? How will it be done? And then a second section which will do a deep dive into how patients representatives are involved in the process and a Q&A discussion. It would be nice if you just joined, maybe you can say hi and where you're based, and if you're involved in one of the ERNs, which ERN you're involved in. I think there's quite a few new EPAG representatives I don't know, and we've also got some very nice friendly project managers joining us, so nice to see some of you join from today's webinar. And the project managers can tell me whether I've got this right or not at the end. I can be evaluating myself. So the amicus system, it stands for, the A is assessment, the M is for monitoring, and the E is for evaluation. And so the ERNs get assessed at the beginning in terms of members joining, the setting up of the networks. Ongoing, the networks monitor how they're progressing, and at a 5-year point, the networks get evaluated. So the amicus system connects the activities in assessment, monitoring, and evaluation together. So it makes sure that what happens that they're not individual hurdles to be crossed at a point in time, but each one builds a conversation and builds and are connected, so you can see how things are developing and how these three things together can incentivize quality improvement. So I won't go into the methodology behind the amicus framework as a quality improvement, but it's just to set it in context. We've done the assessment of the networks in 2017 and the assessment of the newer members in 2019. And the networks have ongoing done the monitoring. So we're coming up to the first evaluation point, and we'll talk about that today. So here, I really like this slide. This is a lot of you who were joining today. This is patient representatives from the community, from the ERNs. They're the people who've guided the work which I'll be presenting today and shaped the development of the work which we've done so far. And I just want to say a big thank you to all of the amicus EPAG task force. We've been active over the last 12 months. And as you can see, these are all the activities we've done. We've had lots of online workshops. We've participated in the European Commission amicus conferences in April and in October. We've done a webinar on demystifying amicus, and today we've got a webinar on the evaluation process, and the task force has helped in developing the patient guide and the Q&A fact sheet, which I'll share with you. Oh, could you mute, please? Thank you. Thanks, Charlotta. So the amicus task force, the EPAG amicus task force, has developed very good expertise now in the amicus framework, and so please connect back with these leads, because they hold the knowledge about what's happening and how the networks are being developed and being assessed and monitored and evaluated. If you know of any patient representatives from any of the ERNs which aren't mentioned here, please let us know, because we'd like to expand the group. It would be great to have a patient representative per ERN connected together. So we have our advocacy position, which we did on assessment. We did an advocacy position on evaluation and monitoring, and on the overall amicus proposal. So we're a very active group. So the to just explain the guide which we've developed for you, for patient representatives, to explain what the evaluation process is about. The European Commission, through the Amicus Task Consortium, developed the evaluation manual, which has the evaluation process and which the networks will follow and the European Commission will follow. And they also developed something called a toolkit, which supports this evaluation manual, which has all these tools. It has the operation criteria for the evaluation criteria for networks, for HCPs, the self-evaluation forms. All these documents are in the toolkit. Now, I could hand you both these documents and say, if you want to know about evaluation, read them. However, whilst they're very well developed, together they come to nearly 200 pages. It's quite hard work if you're not a geek like me. I love evaluation, I love assessment, I love monitoring. So for me, I read these with glee, but for you, you might find it a bit too overwhelming and what to understand. So we turn this 200 pages into a 16-page guide, which is a 9-page technical summary with a short appendix. This is available. This is on our website as of today. We can send you the link to that and you can have a look at it. But I would recommend that this guide, because it is quite technical still, for the patient representatives who will be involved in the evaluation process directly, I would recommend that they refer to it. For every patient representative involved in the network, we have developed a simpler, less technical document, which is a Q&A fact sheet, which explains the why, what, who, when, how questions. So this hopefully makes it clear in a very simple way, so you can understand what's going on at this important time in the network's history and evolution. And that's 2 pages. So we went from 200 to about 16 to 2. So I'm going to cover off a bit of the why, what, when, who, how, and the outcomes we expect. So why is the ERNs being evaluated and their members? The Cross-Border Healthcare Directive is the legal base for the ERNs to exist. And this sets up the requirement of the European Commission to develop European Commission legislation. It's legislation the European Commission could develop to set the networks up and to monitor them and evaluate them. So this implementation decision sets out, its legal document, that the networks, all the networks and their members should be periodically evaluated at least every 5 years. The Commission should appoint an independent evaluation body to undertake this, and they should work in consultation with member states to develop the evaluation manual process and supporting documents, which they've done. So that this is a legal basis for the networks having to be evaluated at the 5-year point. And I'll come back to this document on the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive in a minute. So what will be the subject of the network's evaluation? Well, both the networks themselves and their members will be evaluated, their HCP members. The 4 areas which the networks will be evaluated will be, have they achieved the objectives they said they would do in the beginning? The Cross-Border Healthcare Directive, this document, lists actually 8 objectives the ERNs should achieve, but the requirement was that each ERN could pick 3. And I'll show you that in a second. But the evaluation will check from when they started and what the network said they would do in the beginning in terms of their objectives. How far have they come in progressing and achieving that objective? Which is quite a qualitative assessment, really. They'll also assess the performance of the networks and the outcomes over the past 4 or 5 years. So they'll be looking at the monitoring information and the networks have done and the contributions of the members of the network. They'll also look at the grant agreements the networks had signed up to. Each network said they might set up a registry or develop 5 new guidelines. So they'll look at what they said they would do, and then they'll look at what the deliverables they submitted to fulfill that grant, and they'll check the quality of them as well. And then the last bit is that they will check whether the networks still fulfill the delegated decisions criteria, which is set out there to be an ERN. There is a criteria that I think it's that the network should have members from at least 8 countries. I think it is 8. So if the networks had reduced members of, then they wouldn't be able to continue. So there's some very core requirements they could check, but there's also some operational criteria which they need to check they continue to fulfill. So the HCPs that each member of the ERN, and it's only HCPs who have been be a member of a network since the start of the network will be evaluated. So all the HCPs who joined in the second wave, you're off the hook. You don't need to be assessed. You've only just started. So, but each HCP, all of them who've been, I think there's 900 who joined the ERNs in 2017, will be evaluated against 4 areas. One is to check that they still continue to provide specialist and quality care. They still will check whether they maintain the necessary levels of activity and experience to be a member of that ERN. So each ERN has some core criteria, specialist criteria to be a member. So it could be to be in Eurocan and you're a sarcoma specialist that you need to see 100 soft tissue sarcomas a year and 50 bone sarcoma surgeries a year. So they'll check whether the HCP member still fulfills that criteria. They'll also check and see how the HCP has contributed to the ERN. Some HCPs are more active than others, but they'll want to know how they've contributed, how they've been supported to contribute, and what have been the barriers to contribute. And they'll ask a very qualitative question around looking at whether the HCP, what they see the value of the ERN has been and the value of being involved. So those are the 4 areas the HCPs will be evaluated, and the 4 which the ERNs will be evaluated. I mentioned here with the ERNs that the networks in the beginning, in the original application, said that they would select 3 criteria from the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive. My question to you as patient representatives, do you know what the objectives the network had committed to achieving were in the original application? I mean, I can't. I mean, I've been active in most of the ERNs over the time, but it's sort of been lost in the fog of activity. So we had a call with the project managers. Your audit participated in the project manager working group yesterday, and we said to the project managers, because the ERNs will be evaluated to see how they've progressed in achieving these objectives which they set out to do, we asked them to share what the 3 objectives their network had committed to doing with the patient representatives. So if you don't know, reach out to your friendly neighborhood project manager and ask them. So we've got Michelle from Gentoris. It could be that Gentoris said that they would contribute to pooling of knowledge regarding sickness prevention. Or they could be that they wanted to reinforce research, epidemiology, surveillance like registries and provide training. So each network picked one of these 3, and I'm not going to read them here, but you'll have the slide deck and you can have a look at it in more detail. So that's a really important first step for you. I mentioned that the delegated decision had a number of criteria or operational criteria which the networks had to fulfill, and that the networks will be evaluated if they still fulfilled them. When we developed the assessment framework for the ERNs back in 2016, we took what was in the legislation, we developed it into a set of operational criteria, they were called. The amicus and the networks had to say, self-assess whether they, in their application, whether they met that operational criteria or not. So roll forward 5 years, the amicus consortium who developed the evaluation approach took those original operation criteria and turned them into evaluation criteria. So they pretty much took what was there originally set out at the beginning in the assessment, but they changed the sort of the verb or the tense. So instead of saying the networks will develop registries, the evaluation criteria would say the ERN has developed a registry, has captured data for its patient population. So this is more seeing whether the networks have fulfilled what they said they would in terms of a clear set of criteria. So these criteria are structured in a number of ways. There's a criteria for each domain. There's a guideline for what should be covered. It sets out how the network can evaluate or measure itself against achieving this criteria, and what type of evidence they would need to produce to show that they have fulfilled that criteria in their self-assessment. And if you see these little hearts, if it's got a little heart, it means it's a core measurable element, which means the networks have to have achieved it. It's not it's partially met, it has to be met. So that's the structure of each of the evaluation criteria. And you can see here, these evaluation criteria for networks and for HCPs, they're different. I'm only going to talk today about the networks because the HCP evaluation is slightly different. And I think it would be confusing to cover both today. But if you see that there's a number of areas, the evaluation criteria being developed: governance, coordination, clinical care, quality and patient safety, patient-centered care, contribution to research, education and training, and networking dissemination. Each one of those areas has been broken down into a number of criteria, a total of 20. Each one of these criteria have been broken down further into measurable elements. So the first one on governance could have 3 measurable elements. But of those measurable elements, a number are core, which I mentioned, which will have the heart. So out of the 20 criteria, there's 52 measurable elements the networks have to self-assess against, of which 30 are mandatory. Many of these relate to patient involvement in the ERNs, and that's why I'm taking some time to explain these are the standards the networks will be self-assessed against and evaluated against. I'll come back to that in a second. So when will the evaluation process start? I think any day. I think the project managers are on tender hooks and full of excitement. We say in Germany, Aufgeregt, it's a nervous excitement. We expect the evaluation process to take between 10 and 12 months. We know that the Commission had done a call for the assessment and evaluation framework. It was trying to secure an independent evaluation body, so they did a call for that, and that call went out in June, closed in June. They appointed, we believe, an independent evaluation body in September this month. So just recently, I think the ink is still not dried on the contract. And so we think that the evaluation process should start in October. At the latest, end of October, beginning of November, because I think there's a tight turnaround. The ERNs have to be evaluated before the end of the 5 years. So this is time pressured. And we expect the outcome, the reports, back in August next year. I think it's a very ambitious timeline. It will Oh, sorry, could you mute? Thanks, Isabella. If you think that all 24 networks will be evaluated at the same time, all 900 HCPs will be evaluated at the same time, that's a busy period. The project managers will have their hands full, and the members of the networks will as well. So I think if there's a bit of slippage on that, I think it would be favourable for everyone. I think it probably should be an 18-month process, and I think that's still pretty tough. So who will be involved? Will we as patient representatives? Well, the answer is yes. The one thing I would say about the Amicus Consortium, who came in and developed the assessment manual, evaluation manual, they really saw that the ERNs were truly patient-centered. And they reflected that in the evaluation methodology. So you see here the key actors who will be involved in the evaluation of the ERNs. The ERN coordinator and the coordinating team, obviously. We'll have also the coordinators of EU-funded projects, so like who's the chair for the registry grant or the research grants, or who's the chair of the task force for guidelines in your network. Each network has their own structure, so some have sub-networks like ERN lung, so it could be the chair for the idiopathic lung network in the ERN lung or cystic fibrosis. So all those sort of leads or coordinators will be involved in the evaluation of the networks. Patient representatives will be involved as well. And there's no hard and fast guidance on how patient representatives will be selected. But if we take from the learning from how they're approaching this with the clinicians, they're only evaluating the people who've been in the network since the beginning, so from when the network started. So I would imagine that the patient representatives they'll involve formally in the process will be the ones who've been there since pretty much the beginning, because they've seen the journey, the 5-year development of the network. They'll have that understanding, that experience. This is my thoughts on it. And I think, like with the chairs of the working groups and sub-networks, I think they'll also speak to the patient representatives, which are leads in either the executive committees or steering committees. So I think they'll focus on those to be involved in the assessment process itself, but we can come back to that in a bit more. And with the HCP members, only the ones which were involved by the first call will be involved, not from the second. So how will the evaluation take methodology? How will the networks be evaluated? It's broken into 4 areas. Each ERN, and the project manager would be busy on this now, I'm sure, will take the self-assessment form and self-assess their network against the evaluation criteria. Those 20 areas with 50 measurable elements and the 30 core elements. So they'll self-assess and they'll say, we've achieved this, and they'll score it a 2. They'll say this, we haven't done anything on it, we'll score it a 0, or we've implemented something on it, partly done, which is a 1. They'll also pull together some evidence to support their self-assessment. And there's a lot of documents which are recommended as supporting evidence for each one of those measures. The independent evaluation body then takes over the process, and they will conduct a documentation review. They'll review this self-assessment form, and they'll also review the supporting evidence, and they'll try and identify, does this ring true? Is this self-assessment, is it an accurate one? Or are there questions around, well, really, have you really set up the registry yet if it's not open for people to submit data? So they'll try and find inaccuracies or areas which they want to discuss and learn more about. So in this documentation review, once they've completed it, they'll then set up a call with an online meeting with the ERN coordinators and the work package coordinators, or the project coordinators. And the questions that they've identified from doing the documentation review, they'll use this as a point to delve further and to get more qualitative understanding of whether the self-assessment was accurate or not. Representatives will also be interviewed. So I think that that's really quite bold, not bold. I think it really shows that you and your voice and your views of the ERNs and how much they've achieved and where they're going matters. So you've been given, I think, in this process as patient representatives, a lot of an opportunity to contribute to this in a meaningful way. With that comes with responsibility. And I think that if you are going to be picked to be interviewed as part of the evaluation process, I think you need to prepare. And the guide which I showed you earlier, which we developed, the 16-page document, please review that. Your audits and the project managers are here to support the patient representatives, be active and be empowered in this process, so we can organize a call with each ERN patient group community and discuss some of those questions which we think will be asked, to get the feeling from the group, the views and opinions of the group. So if you're the patient, I saw Isabel a minute ago, if you're the one being, invited to be interviewed, Isabel, having some of those discussions with the Epicare EPAGs and getting more wider views sort of builds your message in that interview process. I think that would be helpful. That's an example. I'm sorry to pick on you, Isabel. It was because you had your mic off. So what's the outcome of the evaluation process? So we'll get a nice report from the networks themselves, and each HCP will get an evaluation report as well. You can see the detail of what they'll report on. The key thing is that the report won't say a positive or negative assessment. It won't say Epicare gets a positive result and it's done really well. It will say more that whether it's a satisfactory, the networks are being developed in a satisfactory way, or whether there's areas for which need improvement. So there's not a positive or negative. It's more about identifying and trying to encourage the networks to focus on areas where they need to do more. And I think all the networks have achieved so much, but I think all the networks have areas where they could improve on as well. This is a journey. So, and each one of the reports will have a one-year improvement plan, a requirement for the networks to develop a one-year improvement plan. I'm not going to go into the detail here, but I think if you want to know more, you can read the slides when we share them with you. So I can see Isabel there in the back of her head going, but what will I do as a patient representative? How will I be involved? What questions will I be asked? How will I get involved? So I highlighted that the evaluation of the networks, the patient representatives will be interviewed. We don't know how, as I said, how they'll be selected, but I would assume, I think it would be only fair to have patient representatives who have, the view of the 4 or 5 years of the networks from application developing. I think they would be real added value in interviewing them, because they could see that journey in a more in a time framework. I think there's than someone who joined 6 months ago. But as I say, we don't know how people will be selected. We believe that the interviews will be separate, I think, than with the interviews with the network coordinators, but it's not clear. The coordinator of the network will facilitate the communication between the independent evaluation team and the patient representatives for the interview. So they'll be your main contact point to ensure that you turn up at the right date and you're willing to do this. We think that it will take less than 2 hours. And the evaluation team will provide a transcript to the interview. So just to confirm that you're happy with what's been heard. We pulled together a set of possible questions. We thought it was, to help us prepare as a community. A 2-hour interview is a long time. I mean, I'm sure lots of you can wax lyrical to talk about your ERN for 2 hours. We're all quite passionate about this. But we had a look to see, because there is an interview guide for the networks coordinators and the interviews with the HCP members. So we thought, well, if those are the types of questions they're saying they'll ask those people, I think that the independent evaluation body will also ask you as patient representatives the same type of questions. So the HCPs are asked about what barriers have they been encountered to contributing in a meaningful way in the network. So I think the independent evaluation body will say, what do you as a patient representative, what barriers have you encountered to contribute in a meaningful way? I think that would be a very sensible question. Also, what type of support have you received? Whether that's support from the ERN itself, the project management team, from your audits, from your own patient organisation. So they'll ask you about how you've been supported to have a more meaningful contribution. They'll also look at your reflections on the ERN itself and the ERN system as a whole. So, this is a new construction and people around the world are looking at the ERNs and going, this is amazing, look at what you're doing. But what's your view, being, feet on the ground in the EU, understanding the needs of your community? Are the networks focusing on the right things? What else needs to be done? So I think that reflection is going to be, I think having some thinking around that before you walk into the interview would be really helpful. That's why I'm suggesting we could set up a mini call with the patient representatives for each of the ERNs to stimulate a group discussion on that topic, because I think we could brainstorm that really well. And that would enable the people who are going in, not just to be saying their personal view, but they could reflect the views of the patients involved in the ERNs overall. You'll also be, I think you'll also be asked, because the others will be asked, the networks coordinators and clinicians, you'll also be asked about whether you think the networks have achieved the objectives that they had originally set out in the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive in their application. So that's why I'm saying, do you know yours? Do you know what Epicare, Eurogen, Rare Skin said they would set out to achieve in the beginning? That's why I'm saying, go back to your project manager and ask them that. I think it's good for you to understand, because all the networks do quite the same activities, webinars, sharing of best practice, virtual consultation, but what were the specific objectives which your network set out to do? Because actually that's specific to your community, for your disease cluster or thematic area. You'll also be asked, I think, around what you think the achievements of the networks have been so far. And again, I think we really need to have a discussion in the patient communities in each network to think through some of these things, because I think I'm a patient advocate, we've done a lot, we can always do more. I focus on what more we can do. And we're very bad at reflecting and recognizing what achievements have been made. And I think you as a patient representative, if you're involved in the evaluation and interviewed, you have a responsibility to have a balanced view and to show the positives as well as the areas of improvement which you think are needed. So I think those discussions internally would be really helpful between the patient representatives, and we've got time in October, November to reflect on that and to set that up. So if you want to take me up or on my idea about having a mini call, a workshop with the other patient representatives to think through some of these questions, link back with Lenya and with Rita and say that you'd like to do that, and let's organize a call. I think it won't harm, and I think it's also really helpful for us to reflect on this ourselves. So I mentioned earlier about the evaluation criteria. The 20 criteria, the 15 measurable elements, and the 30 core measurable elements. Some of those standards the networks have to self-assess against are directly related to patient involvement in the ERNs, are directly related to the level of maturity of that collaboration, and directly relevant to what type of activities you've been involved in and how you've contributed, and also what the impact your contribution has had. I think that's brilliant. You know, not just let's tick the box. We have patient representatives here, let's keep them to one side, but where have you been involved? How well has this collaboration matured, and where is the impact of your contribution? Are the networks meeting your priorities? I think they're brilliant standards to assess the networks on, and I think that's why the amicus people said the ERNs are at the heart patient-centered. I think these standards reflect that. So we looked at the operation criteria for the ERNs, and we pulled out the standards related directly to patient involvement, because we thought that that would be important, because that's about understanding how you as patients are involved. So if I just look at structure, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's about 5 or 6 criteria which relate to what are the mechanisms for patient involvement. So the first criteria relates to representatives have been included in the governance of the ERNs with a specific role. So I think all the ERNs have patient representatives involved, and I think the supporting evidence would be the rules of procedure of the ERNs. They have one around their governance and stuff, and they say that each ERN has a board and there's patient representatives on that, and they have a governance table which shows an EPAG group or a patient council. Each network has something different. So that's a very structural criteria. You either have it or you don't. There's another criteria around if the ERN monitors and evaluates the involvement of patients in the ERN activities. So how has the network had a system to check how are patients involved in guideline development? Are they involved in research? You know, is there a way to monitor that level of involvement? And so that's a clear structural aspect. They'll also ask a criteria about, is there a mechanism to empower patients to contribute to the development of patient information in the network about their condition? It's very specific, but there is one. It asks about have the networks developed a strategy for involving patients as equal partners in the care and treatment that the network covers in the HCP members? And is there a common tool for measuring patient experience and their families of the care they receive? So some of the networks took part in a pilot of the HCare survey. Some of you might have known that. That's a quality, that's a patient experience questionnaire of people who've gone through the service. So these are all very structural things. So the project managers completing the self-assessment will be able to say yes, 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 and show the document which shows that mechanism. But there's a criteria which is also about the maturity of the collaboration. And so the standard is around the ERNs have developed partnerships with a number of stakeholders, including patient organizations. So that's not just collaborating with you as patient representatives, but collaborating with your patient organization or with Eurodis or with other patient groups. So there's a measure about that. And then this is my favorite, if I'm honest. If I could highlight my favorite criteria, I told you I'm a nerd, is the board, this is about impact. So what's been your impact of all the time you've invested in taking part in board meetings of the ERN? How has the networks incorporated your opinions when they're outlining the strategies they're developing? So I can't keep on picking on Isabel, but I need to find someone else. I'm going to find Kate. So Kate's been active in the ERN or AMI, and you've said, oh, we should be, this isn't just about genetics. What we want to do stuff more on therapies. These affect young kids. What are we doing about access to therapy? Therapy support to optimize childhood development. So I know that was the message from AMI gave and Dorica. Did the networks board change their strategy and go beyond genetics? Is that being captured? And has it been demonstrated? Is there evidence to show? Or is your contribution so involved that we don't separate out your contribution to the HCP? So I think that's really great. That will tax the best of us. I know that in the UK, the National Cancer Action Team, we used to do networks for cancer in the UK, and we had patients involved in the boards. And when there was a board meeting and they captured the patient representatives contributed, they would minute very clearly the patient's contributions and what their needs were, or what they're saying were priorities. And so you could track back through the minutes over a year what was said. And then you could also see whether action was taken. So it's a bit bureaucratic, but I like it. And the last one is explain in which strategies or issues patients and their families' inputs has been requested, and how was the opinions incorporated. Many of you worked with me or Lenya developing patient journeys. The patient journeys were a way to capture the issues and needs of people with your condition. So I think that would be a good tool to show how, we captured your needs, but then how were those opinions incorporated? How are the networks, did they prioritize guidelines to cover Dravet syndrome or bladder extrophy, since then? So we said that those patient journeys were good. The last bit is around activities. Now, this measure, there's one measure 1.3.3. I think I probably have a level of autism because I like these numbering systems. So this measure relates directly to have patients and patient groups as major stakeholders in ERN activities. How have they participated formally and continuously? And where have they been involved? So you can say involved in guidelines, involved in research, involved in setting research priorities, or in doing webinars. So this one measure, you could write a summary of the types of activities you've been involved in and highlight the deliverables out of it. But they'll check whether there's acknowledgement of you as patients, as co-authors on articles, on guidelines. So that's a direct evidence to demonstrate that you have been active in the ERN's activities. But if I was an evaluator, I would look at that and I'd look for supporting evidence. So if Eurogen had said, oh, Dahlia and Claire have been involved in guideline development and they've been co-authors, there is other criteria, standards, which ask the networks around, have you developed guidelines? Not specifically about patient involvement, just generally. And the networks will list all the guidelines they've been involved in. So if I'm an evaluator, I would check what's being said to support 1.3.13 and to see what the other deliverables and what's being said, whether patients' involvement in these other activities are mentioned. I'd cross-check that. And I think I would find it quite odd if Michelle had said, that Gally had been a co-author of a guideline. And then when I look at the guideline, I don't see that she's a co-author, you know? So I think we have to, it's a bit of a call to the project managers. Don't think about just mentioning the patients in the patient involvement direct standards. You have to mention them in all the other activities, because that supports your claim of true involvement. I think we've come to the end. You'll be pleased. And I hope there's some questions and answers. I don't know. I'm going to look at the faces I can see you. Come on, switch on your video so I can see you all. I can see some smiley faces. I can see some masks. So first of all, is there any questions? Did the explanation I gave about the evaluation and your contribution, was it clear? Oh, I got the thumbs up from Alexandra. Great, I'm very pleased about that. Ines is the team leaders on this call, so that thumbs up goes a long way. So is there any questions? Is there any questions from the chat, Lenya, Rita? Or have I completely bored you? I told you I'm a complete nerd. You can unmute your mics. You can ask the questions.
Yeah. Matt, this is Michele.
Hey, Michele.
Yeah, how are you? Fine. Thanks for your very clear presentation. I have a question which is not clear to me. The evaluation process criteria, how are along the different ERNs, are this common or diverse or different?
They're common.
Common. Okay, thanks.
So the evaluation criteria were based on the legislation. For the ERNs, they're common standards. But the self-assessment shows how far the networks have continued to meet or fulfilled. Some of those evaluation criteria are actually enhanced standards to try and incentivize people like Michelle and Eurogen to do more. So we don't expect everyone to achieve full amounts because they really push the envelope. It's not, you know, it's some are quite ambitious, to be honest. So the evaluation criteria for the networks are the same. For the HCPs, there's a core set of criteria which are the same, but there's some specific ones related to level of experience. So I can't remember which ERN you're active in.
EuroBloodNet.
EuroBloodNet. So it could be that to be in EuroBloodNet, you need to have a caseload of 400 for thalassemia or for haemophilia to be clinically competent, or diagnose 50 new cases a year, which could be quite a lot. So those are specific to each ERN, but that is only directly relevant to the HCPs. They had to show that at the beginning. They have to show they maintain that competency, and their numbers haven't gone down.
Yes. The second question is related with the measurement criteria. Also here, are common or different inside the ERNs?
They're common. They're all a set of common.
Yes. Okay. And then, Matt, sorry, if I can discuss how we can have common criteria if are different different topics.
So the European legislation sets out a set of criteria for the ERNs, which are core criteria.
Yeah.
The HCPs have core criteria, but they've got some specific ones. What I mentioned that there's 4 areas of the evaluation for the ERNs. One is about the evaluation criteria, but another one would relate to the objectives, and the objectives will be different for each network based on the different needs of those communities. It could be that, you know, there's enough research going on in metabolic communities, and you don't need to do more. So it's about training. So they're different. So it's just one aspect is the standards.
Standards, yes.
The second aspect is the achievement of objectives. The third one is the performance of the network in terms of against the monitoring standards which are there, and the contribution of the HCPs. So has the networks been really active? 80% of the HCPs have been really involved, and there's 20,000 guidelines being developed. So that's specific to the networks in terms of their priorities. And then the last section, I can't remember, but I'll come back to me.
Okay, thanks.
Ines, you're thinking, is that your thinking face? It's dangerous. I think we have to control your mic so you can't speak.
It is my thinking face. So remember when, when we were working with the consortium that developed the evaluation framework, remember that we were very pushing a lot to kind of get in their heads that the networks were at different levels of maturity when they started 5 years ago. Some of them were already very mature because they were networks that had been working together, or HCPs that had been working together for a long time. Others were really brand new. And remember, Matt, that we were telling them, please take this into consideration. It's not the same. You need to contextualize that. You need to acknowledge that some of them, the different levels, starting points, let's say. So this just got me thinking. First, my question is, the only way where I see that they've kind of included this thinking is that the core elements are really a common denominator, which is the minimum common denominator. But is there any other way that they've included this, or that you've seen that they have included this kind of consideration? Because I think it's important, and it's also what Michele was kind of pointing to.
So I've got quite technical about the evaluation and standards and objectives. But if you think this, the assessors will look at two things. One is they'll look at the outputs, the products of the network, the guidelines, the quality of the guidelines, the number of guidelines, they're very fixed, tangible, concrete deliverables. So they'll review those, and they'll be able to, they're quite quantitative. But they'll also do the interviews with you and the clinicians, and that's very qualitative. So that qualitative bit, does Pierre in EuroBloodNet and the leads there, what's their view of the achievements of the network? What's their view about achieving those 3 objectives? And they'll see whether you as patient representatives, what's your view? So they'll triangulate the qualitative messages to see about the achievements of the network, and then measure them, sort of weigh them up against what they've seen in terms of concrete. So it's qualitative and quantitative. Though that's how they'll look at each network. And what they have with the standards is a way to sort of check that they're still fulfilling the legislation. That's all it is. Each of the ERNs is different in size, in scope, in the needs of the patient communities. And I showed you the advocacy tools, which the EPAG Amicus Task Force, we developed different position papers. Susanna was very active in that. She's on today. And Dorica as well. And what we, Joachim, what we did was we highlighted that to the Amicus consortium. We're saying you can't compare networks. It's like comparing apples and pears. And we wanted to make sure that if there was a core set of standards, it sort of implies that all the networks are the same, and they're not. And how can you there's a risk if you just have core standards that everything, that things get compared. Eurogen against EuroBloodNet, completely different networks, scope, size, etc. They heard us. So one of the things I was very proud from the EPAGS community, and honestly, they are very informed patient representatives on the group, more informed than me now. We said to the consortium about that each network needed to be, the report which on the network needed to set out what the structure of the network was, size, scope, disease areas, coverage of member states, the activities of the network, the maturity of the network, and the impact of the network. We know that when the 24 networks were approved, 12 of the networks were already active as communities for the past 20 years. The haemophilia community, the thalassemia community have been active with the patient representatives for 20 odd years, So your starting point as an ERN is very different to the one of craniofacial and Ernica, who came together as a community through the application process. So we wanted to make sure the report of each ERN was structured in a way which could demonstrate difference in size and scope, maturity, activities, because then when you look at the networks together, you can see the difference. You can understand why some networks might not have massive registries with 40 million people on, because they're covering ultra rare diseases. The fact they have 10 patients on there is remarkable, So we did try to nuance it, and we did successfully do that. So the way that the evaluation reports are based on that framework, which is which we referenced anyway. I don't know whether I answered your question, Ines, but oh, I got a thumbs up from, that's 2 thumbs up. Maybe by the end we can get all thumbs up. Question in the chat, Lenya.
Yes, so
hello.
Hi. How will the patient representatives be selected for the interviews was one question.
I would love, they haven't been clear on that. I think that they would, as I said on the webinar, I think it would be, I'm sure the network coordinators would contribute to that process. The application, the self-assessment form would list all the patient representatives active in the ERNs. So for ERCnet, Susanna, you'll be down on that as on the self-assessment saying, your organization and Claudia and others. So the independent evaluation body will see all. They might do a random selection, but I think that would be a bit unfair, because I know that the patient community and the ERNs have been developing, and I think that the people who should be selected, the pool of people, should be the ones who've been involved in the networks for at least 2 years. They need, ideally from the beginning, because I think that's fair. I think, Ami, you've been there from the start, haven't you? And you know how it started in the original application and the journey that IFIC has developed. I think that's more informed understanding of the ERNs, and I think so. I would advocate that it's people who've been around, I would say a bit long in the tooth, been around since the beginning. But that doesn't, Susanna, you came, not shortly after, but I think it's just about identifying people who are informed, who understand that history, because they're interviewing people from the ERNs who've been from the start. So it's not a clear answer, but that's just my
Thanks,
opinion.
Matt. And there was another comment in the chat, or comment questions, clarification. So we should develop core criteria for patient advocates that show that they feel completely involved in the ERN?
So
Question mark.
So I think those criteria exist. I think we have to stop separating us out from the ERNs. We're part of the ERNs. The networks are evaluated against the level of involvement. I showed you that some of the criteria there. Each one of those standards has an underpinning set. It says what the evidence would be. Like with guideline development, patients should be involved. It says, as evidence, you should be acknowledged as co-authors. I mean, I think that shows a level of maturity of involvement. So I think that what they've got at the moment in standards is enough to be able to make that decision, to be able to see how your voice has been heard and used to inform strategic developments of the network. I think that's massive. So I think that's also shows meaningful involvement if people can do that. Hi, Christina. Oh, you've taken.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's just to this point. I just asked this how we can develop core things. Is if I'm involved somewhere in a text, in a document, in something as a co-author, I would like to have seen this paper from the beginning on, not only when it's finished.
Absolutely.
And I have to underline to sign it. This is too late. This is This is just a coexistent as an EPAC beside the healthcare professional.
I think your point's really well made. So when it asks about patient involvement in ERN activity, let's say, one of the areas is guideline development. You can say patients are involved and you can point to a document where they're co-authors. If the networks have got a policy on how to develop a guideline, and that in that policy it shows where patients should be involved, that's supporting evidence. The interview process will be interviewing to understand, the interviewers will be trying to understand, saying, well, okay, well, we can see that they're involved, but the evaluators will want to get behind that to really understand whether it's meaningful. And I think the way it's set up at the moment, any half decent evaluator will be able to understand the degree and maturity of the patient's contribution. They'll be able to see it from the standards, the self-assessment and the evidence which is provided. I think it's there. And I think, just to your point, I think because it's there and because it will get evaluated, it will get commented on in the evaluation process, in the report, and it might be an area of improvement. The fact it's there as a standard really gives food for thought to a lot of the networks around where to improve and how to do that. So I think it's a very positive sign. My point earlier about maturity of the networks, EuroBloodNet has collaborated with the patient community for donkey's years. So, working together in the network, they're old pals and their relationships have already been developed. They've got a way of working. But for those newer networks which came together to begin with, a lot of them were, started and they were going, oh my God, there's patients here. What do we do? We had to start that process. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It doesn't mean that, the more mature ones are better. It just means that their starting point was different. What me as an evaluator, when I used to go into services, I didn't really mind whether a service was good or bad. I checked about whether they had the curiosity and interest to get better. And as an evaluator, for a network with a new patient community and new relationships, I would be interested in seeing the journey of how the relationship has evolved, how from the beginning to now, how patients are being more involved and encouraged. The questions they'll ask in the interview is, what barriers have you been to your involvement? what her support has been. So they do get under the skin of this.
I know what you mean, and I know it's a long way we have to take, but after 5 years, it's kind of frustrating to see that every idea we give in as patients is just like, oh, you're not an expert, you're a patient.
Yeah.
It's always, there's just one little piece missing, the connection between that a patient is an expert in daily life with his illness. And this is not explained for our group. This is my problem.
No, I understand. And it's so we have to unpick that problem. We have to get behind it, and we all have a responsibility to do that. And so what your audits are doing, we're trying to support the ERNs to get better. We're also trying to be reflective and seeing what has worked, what has improved. We're trying to change our approach. So we'll be submitting a report to giving evidence to the ERN project managers to, sorry, could you mute your mic, Anna? Thanks. So we're going to share that we try to be reflective and improve as well, to show that we don't just think everything's good. We try to learn and we try to adjust as well. So it's a journey, and I absolutely understand. I think some of the clinicians and patients come together, and there's a natural, like with any relationships, because networks are about relationships, there's a natural spark, you know, and you get on like a house on fire. And I want to say that about you, Isabel, with Epicare, but you'll probably challenge me on that in a second. But others, you know, there isn't a spark. It's like trying to light a bonfire when it's wet. You know, it just culturally for a number of things, but we have to try and improve that, because at the heart of these networks, we believe that if you line up patient needs with clinical needs, and you then address them together by sharing expertise, we can achieve more. And I think that kernel is at the heart of what we do. Isabel.
Hi, I'm honored to participate in this meeting.
Oh, it was the wrong Isabel. Sorry, Isabel. I was meaning.
Do you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Okay.
No, she can go through. I can speak later. Please, Isabella.
No, we've lost her. Go on, Isabel.
No, we have two Isabella.
It's very
Okay.
confusing.
No, thank you, Matt, for the great presentation, because it was necessary to have some clarification from patients. Sure, we have different experience, and also we have also internal of IPAG Italia. We spoke about that, and it's very clear for us that the network are totally different. They start for a different point, and also they grow up differently. But from my point of view, we have a risk now to make an auto goal, and we need to avoid that, because the network is, from my point of view, great opportunity. Sure, some network working very well because maybe collaboration was also before, because everything was more easier, the group was not so big. But for other point, we saw also some EPAG not very informed of the activity of the network. They don't know exactly also what they do, the other EPAG in the same ERN. And it's something that for me need the coordination of each ERN, make an internal meeting with all subgroup to also communicate where they are with some project. Also because it's very difficult to understand from some EPAG that they don't participate very well, the process, and also the time that we need. You spoke before about EPAG, patient journey, leaflet, and so on. But it's a long process. We need to define, we need to translate in the different language, we need to disseminate also that everyone is about that. So some EPAG are on the end of this network, and it's very difficult And sure, we need to improve how communicate exactly where we are, accept also the time that we need, because all patient journey and leaflet are a review from the physician, because we need to be sure that the information inside is correctly. So I think we need also to understand and the time that is needed for make a great job. But sure, we have a great opportunity to have the same criteria, the same needs, the same evidence that needs the family in Europe and the patients. Sometimes we need also to accept, I don't remember who speak about to be the name of the EPAG internal of some publication, but we need to accept our role. Normally we are not mentioned, or we are only in a knowledge, thank you to the community. Now we are partner in some publication. Sure, if I think I am also very involved in the publication, but I maintain my rule of EPAG, I can give some contribution in some point, collecting the data, information, disseminate, underline some aspect, but sure, I cannot written a scientific article. So maybe I participate in the conclusion, in some comment. So, but it's something that we need to grow up together, learn each other what is, could be better, the collaboration. But again, as you say, it's a process and is a journey that we need to do all together. But what is important, and I suggest, is my suggestion, that to involve that each ERN EPAG coordinator need to have a meeting with all EPAG to update a little bit where we are, where they are, which are the next step, and what is the timeline when they think is deliverable some project or some topic. Because if some EPAG will be interviewed today, I saw, because we do some example in our group, and it's not true what they say, because missing information is an important topic that we realize, and it's better to cover and to have really the correct information before the interview. I think is very, very important.
So no. So you're absolutely right. So if as I highlighted, there's no clear rule about who will be chosen for interviews, but I think it will be the patient representatives who've been active in the executive committees or the whatever steering committee that some network boards just have 2 patient representatives on, or there's an executive group. So I think it will be those people who will be interviewed, because that's who they're interviewing with the clinicians. I don't see it will be anything different. So I think they will be identifying the patient representatives who are more informed and not new. But I think I take my hat off to the Amicus Consortium. They gave us a voice in this. And I think that is a big thing to give. That comes with responsibility. So you're right, we have to have an informed view. We have to prepare. And I just want to highlight to Lenya and Rita that I get the impression that Isabel is actually asking us that we'd set up a little workshop with the EPAGs in Epicare to think through some of these questions and brainstorm. So I think I'm taking from your suggestion that we do that, Isabel.
Okay, thank you.
Michael.
Thanks. I come back at your presentation because I take note one point to have some clarification. In particular, if I understood very well the process of evaluation. No, you mentioned that is in place an evaluation team, which is composed by HCP, is correct? No?
Sorry, and there'll be an independent evaluation team.
Which are professional.
I don't know. I didn't read the tender specification. What they were last time, they had patient representatives on there as well.
Inside the team are also.
Yeah, they did in the assessment process.
Yeah.
So I haven't read the tender because I think I read enough documents.
Yeah.
So I assume that they'll have a balance of experts and people with lived experience and people with clinical expertise.
Yes, is inside the evaluation team are patient representative there.
I believe so. I would be surprised if not.
Explain a bit better. The patient interview is how is connected with this team of evaluation. The patient interview. What is the weight which have in the evaluation? The contribution. What is the contribution?
So the first step in evaluation is self-assessment, which is, I've explained, the project manager team will do that. Then the next step will be the evaluation team will look at that self-assessment and supporting evidence to identify, to form an opinion and identify further questions. So that's a technical review. The next step is to speak with people in the networks, and they'll do that through 2 interviews. An interview with the clinicians, the coordinating team, and leaders of chairs of working groups and patient representatives. So I think that patient representatives are key stakeholders and their views are being given equal weight to that of the clinicians.
Yeah, good. Okay, correct. Okay, it's clear for now. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, or have we exhausted ourselves? Ingrid, is that clear, or I couldn't read your face. I don't know whether you're dismayed or amazed.
No, sorry. I heard about the AMI quiz, but I never really took attention, and so this is new for me. And I'm thinking that I have to connect with my other EPECs in my ERN, and then, you know, we need to be prepared. That's
so if you want support to do that, we're happy to.
Yeah,
so
okay,
so
that's great.
please take us up on our offer.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? We've got a question from Laurence. Lenya?
Sorry, I was taking a note from
Okay.
Laurence. What about ERNs in which you have a lot of different diseases, genetic and not genetic, like the ERN skin?
Yes,
Hence,
I was asking if we needed a representative for each subgroup.
I'm not quite sure whether the interview will be a one-on-one or whether it will be, 3 or 4 patient representatives together. I mean, the network coordinating team and the chairs of the working groups are together. So I would imagine that they might actually get the patient representatives together, identify 2 or 3. So in EuroGen, I think, Michelle, you've got sort of 3 working groups. So you've got for the oncology side, you've got for the children with functional malformations, and then functional in adults. So potentially they would pick 3 patient representatives, 1 from each. I don't know, what's your view, Michelle, as a project manager lead?
Yes, I think probably that's right. I think they would go first for an EPAG chair, and then possibly people who are involved in other activities like guidelines. I think it's really important maybe just to reflect on the fact, I think when you look back now, in just 5 years, the fact that we actually have 24 operational networks of the size that they are, covering so many different countries, I think it's utterly remarkable. And I've been around in European affairs for many, many years now, and I've never seen anything happen like this at such pace, actually, going so fast and then enlarging so quickly. So I think the fact that they actually exist and are operational is a huge achievement. So I wouldn't like to forget that either. And also I think, you know, the fact that the whole thing was constructed and built on the fact that patients are at the heart of all of this. And that wouldn't have happened had it not been for the legislation. And I know it's new for everyone, but again, I think it's an utterly remarkable development, and we've seen really great things happening in our ERN. So I'm excited to see which direction we need to do the quality improvement in going forward. It'll be interesting to have someone have an objective look from outside and let us know where they think we can focus on to do a bit better. So I'm really looking forward to the evaluation, and just want to thank the patient representatives for all that they do, because it wouldn't be the same without them.
Thanks, Michelle. I think, I don't know, Isabel, you wanted to?
Sorry, maybe I lost the first part of the presentation, but I don't know if we speak about when the interview will start, or did you have an idea of timing, more or less?
The timing, we think that the evaluation process is a 10 to 12 month process, and we think it will start end of October, beginning of November. Beginning of November, so that's when it starts. So they will be submitting self-assessments, uploading evidence, then they'll do the documentation review. So I think it's the start of the new year will be the interviews.
Possibly in February, when everyone is available.
Yeah. No, because we do is something, another suggestion. Usually we do as EPAG a report where we are, what we do, also for the annual report that is in February, apropos. So could be very interesting to have in mind where we are also at the end of this year. Usually we make a little bit project by project, a review from EPAG, and not the coordination manager, not a ERN, EPAG internally. We do a list of where we are and which are the deliverable in the next month, so we can accelerate some process or modulate a little bit what we want to present in February annual, which project are end and which are in progress. So could be a suggestion also for the other group of EPAG to do that in October, November, to prepare easily the process.
I mean, I keep on offering about us having a call per ERN. That's me being engaging, but actually, I really want to have a call with each EPAG group in each ERN. So I think you have to maybe contact Lenya and Rita and say, no, we don't want to meet with Matt. Otherwise we meet and we have that call. Yeah, so you have to opt out instead of opting in. That's a very British way of doing it.
But for helping you, and because 24, if you ask in every coordinator to prepare a very short presentation, PowerPoint with the process, maybe recap only the key point, maybe it could be easier.
Yeah, we will. We'll engage with the project manager team. They were really good yesterday. They had their project management team meeting, and we engaged on that. And we shared what I just did today, and we said about how we can support. You know, we really want to work with the project managers and the ERNs to, you know, make sure this is a successful outcome, i.e., that it helps the networks improve and move forward on a stronger foot. I think they're doing really well so far, but overall, but yes, I think we'll definitely do that with the project managers. Susanna.
Yes, only to say thank you, Isabella. It's a good idea because I think in the ERNs between the EPAGs, it could be a lack of communication, a lack of knowledge of the activity into the ERN. That could be a problem with the evaluation process, of course, but also for our daily knowledge of our ERN. So to have a report, but sometimes the chair, even the chair, I talk about me, we are not update about all the activities. So I suppose it could be a good idea to have a report, but also done by the staff of our ERN. But that's all.
Super. Well, I think we have to work together on pulling this information together. I think that shows shared accountability and shared ownership. I think we're at the end of the webinar. It was very nice to see you all and for your questions, and hopefully it was digestible and you go back more informed. And I look forward to collaborating in the next couple of months, and we'll connect through with Lenya and Rita to see how we can set up a call per network. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.